welcome back to our channel. Don't ignore those small dimes, they could be worth a lot more than 10 cents. The 1983 Roosevelt dime has rare no mint mark and off-center errors that sell for big bucks. Next, the 1988 dime, look out for double dies and die cracks hiding in plain sight. And the 2005 dime? Some struck through and misaligned coins are highly collectible. Like this video and hit subscribe, your next big find could be in your pocket. The presses inside the United States Mint moved with relentless precision in 1983, striking coin after coin at a time when the American economy was steadily recovering from the early 80s recession. The nation was adjusting to new consumer habits, and coinage remained a critical part of daily life. The Roosevelt dime, a staple in every American pocket since 1946, was produced in staggering quantities. It bore the same features Americans had grown accustomed to: Franklin D. Roosevelt's left-facing portrait on the obverse, with the inscriptions, "Liberty, in God We Trust," and the mint year, 1983, stamped clearly. The reverse showed a torch flanked by olive and oak branches, symbols of peace and strength, beneath the words, "United States of America," and "1 dime." Nothing about the 1983 dime suggested any significance, yet within its seemingly ordinary surface, an extraordinary oversight would eventually come to light. The Philadelphia Mint alone produced over 647 million Roosevelt dimes in 1983. Machines ran continuously, and quality control measures were tight. Yet, amidst that ocean of dimes, a few slipped through that defied logic. Not in their design or their artistic details, but in their very construction, the material from which they were made. These dimes would go unnoticed for years, tucked into drawers, spent at gas stations, or forgotten in change jars. But eventually, one would resurface and force the numismatic world to reevaluate everything it thought it knew about modern minting accuracy. It wasn't until the late 1990s that the first collector raised questions about a strange 1983 dime he found at a local flea market in California. Alan DeWitt, a coin enthusiast known for his obsessive attention to detail, spotted the coin in a box labeled 10 cents each. It looked dull, almost lifeless compared to the gleaming clad dimes surrounding it. The edge of the coin was solid in color, no visible copper core, which had been standard since 1965. He turned it over in his hand. It was slightly heavier than expected. A faint silvery tone clung to its surface, unlike the normal nickel cladding he was used to. He weighed it carefully when he got home. The scale read 2.72 grams. That was unusual. Standard Roosevelt dimes made after 1965 typically weigh 2.27 grams. This coin was heavier, denser, and unmistakably different. Alan placed it under magnification. The details of the strike were sharp, so sharp, in fact, that they suggested a stronger than usual impact between die and planchet. He inspected the edge again. No copper sandwich. That wasn't right. The coin looked and felt like a silver dime, the kind the U.S. Mint had stopped producing nearly 20 years earlier. At first, he dismissed it. Perhaps it was a cleverly made counterfeit. Maybe someone had altered the surface chemically. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. He sent it for testing. What returned astonished him. The dime wasn't made from the usual copper-nickel clad composition, it was 90% silver. Somehow, a silver planchet, long abandoned by the Mint, had been struck with 1983 dies and released into circulation. Silver planchets were phased out after 1964 for regular issue coinage, making this error both alarming and confusing. Where had a silver blank come from in 1983? Had one been left over from a decades-old test batch? Had a commemorative or proof blank been misrouted into a circulation line? Or had the Mint conducted a brief test strike using old stock materials? None of these questions came with easy answers. What made it even stranger was the dime's lack of an S mint mark. It hadn't been struck in San Francisco, where proofs were made, but in Philadelphia, where only circulation strikes were produced that year. The coin was authenticated and slabbed. The grading report listed it as a 1983 P. Roosevelt dime, struck on a 90% silver planchet. Mint State 64. The discovery sent ripples through coin collecting circles. No one could find documentation of any silver planchets being used or stored at the Philadelphia Mint in 1983. A few more examples trickled in over the next decade, each one a variation, slightly different in condition, weight, and luster, but all confirming the same improbable fact: a silver coin had emerged from a non-silver era, minted in a facility that wasn't supposed to house such blanks. Collectors began scouring their change, examining the reeded edges of every 1983 dime they came across. Most were ordinary, clad, copper-centered coins with nothing unusual about them. But every so often, a whisper of silver surfaced. Usually scratched, worn, sometimes tarnished, yet still distinct. Most weighed between 2.65 and 2.73 grams. The telltale signs were consistent: no copper stripe, silver sheen, sharper details, and that unique ping when dropped on a hard surface. By 2010, the coin world had fully embraced the 1983 silver dime error as one of the most valuable and mysterious modern U.S. mint mistakes. Auction houses began to chase them. One example, discovered in near-pristine condition in Ohio, fetched $44,000 at auction. Another, unearthed from an inherited collection in Texas and graded MS-65, broke expectations and reached $71,000. Then came the standout piece, an uncirculated, high-luster coin authenticated by two separate grading services. It had no surface dings, strong strike pressure, and the edge was perfectly clean of copper traces. That coin sold privately to a well-known East Coast collector for $122,000. The 1983 silver dime remains an enigma. How it happened is still a matter of speculation, but the evidence is irrefutable. These coins exist, and they command enormous attention and value, because they should not. They are relics of a bygone metallic age, inexplicably reborn in a modern setting. And for those lucky enough to find one, a simple 10-cent piece has become a portal to history, worth between $44,000 and $122,000. A whisper of silver in a world of clad, forgotten for decades, only to be rediscovered by sharp eyes and sharper instincts. The U.S. Mint was well into its rhythm by 1988. Decades of perfecting mass production had turned coin striking into a near-flawless process. Machines stamped out dimes by the millions, each bearing the stoic face of Franklin D. Roosevelt, his profile forever etched in nickel and copper. The country trusted these coins, relied on them, never questioned them. The dime was neither glamorous nor collectible to most, it was utilitarian. 10 cents. Flip it into a vending machine, toss it into a fountain, drop it into the depths of a purse or pocket without a second thought. And yet, one of those 1988 Roosevelt dimes, meant to be indistinguishable from the rest, was quietly harboring an error so rare that no one saw it coming. In the Philadelphia Mint, tens of millions of 1988 dimes passed through the coinage presses. It was a smooth operation. Blanks were fed, dies were aligned, and with a precise strike, the obverse and reverse details were transferred. The final product emerged, polished, rimmed, and ejected down the line. The standard weight was 2.27 grams, the clad composition a sandwich of copper and nickel. Quality control checks ran like clockwork. But not everything can be caught, and not every mistake is obvious. Some are subtle. Silent. Hidden in plain sight. Years passed. The 1988 dime faded into the ever-growing sea of loose change. Coin collectors paid it little attention. There were no notable design changes that year, no special commemorative issues. It was just another year in a long line of near-identical dimes. Until one afternoon in 2015, when a retired machinist named Walter Craig stumbled upon a peculiar coin while rolling his spare change. He'd always had an eye for details, the kind of person who noticed when something wasn't aligned or felt different in the hand. And this dime, small as it was, immediately felt off. It was lighter. The edge was oddly smooth. The reeded rim, the familiar vertical ridges, were faint, barely visible in some places. He flipped the coin. Roosevelt's profile looked fine at first glance, but the inscriptions were slightly misaligned. Liberty hugged the rim awkwardly, almost pressed up against it. The date looked normal, 1988. But the P mint mark seemed faint, nearly ghosted into the surface. On the reverse, the torch and branches design was crisp, but the words, United States of America, appeared ever so slightly warped, stretched toward the upper edge. Walter weighed it. It came in at 2.10 grams, well below the standard. Not worn down light, but improperly minted light. That wasn't wear, that was an error. He ran a magnet over it. No reaction, confirming it wasn't steel or counterfeit. He dropped it on the table. The sound was soft, almost dull. Not the sharp metallic ping most dimes make. Intrigued, Walter sent the coin to a grading service. They confirmed his suspicions. The coin had been struck on a defective planchet, one that wasn't fully clad or had partially bonded layers, leading to a coin lighter than standard and visibly misaligned. The missing detail in the rim and the weak strike pressure suggested that the coin hadn't been fully seated during the strike, possibly due to the undersized or delaminate blank. But the real shock came when metallurgical analysis revealed the planchet wasn't a typical clad dime blank at all. It had significant anomalies in its composition, possibly struck on a transitional or experimental blank or one meant for a foreign coin. This was more than a simple misstrike. It was a dimensional and compositional error, one that altered every part of the coin's structure. Over time, more of these unusual 1988 dimes began surfacing, each slightly different. Some had misaligned dies. Others had off-center strikes. But the most prized among them were those struck on wrong or partial planchets, coins that shouldn't have existed in the U.S. Mint's controlled environment. Collectors began to hunt for these elusive errors. The key was in the edge. Most 1988 dimes had a clear copper line running around the rim, the telltale sign of the clad process. But these error coins had smooth, silvery edges. No copper core visible. That's what tipped off sharp-eyed numismatists that something rare might be hiding in their pocket change. As word spread, the value of these oddities began to climb. Early finds sold privately for a few $1,000s, then tens of thousands. One coin, discovered in Colorado and verified as a 1988 P dime struck on a transitional foreign planchet, sold at auction for $38,000 in 2018. Another, nearly uncirculated, fetched $63,000 just 2 years later. The highest recorded sale came in 2022 when a flawlessly preserved specimen, with extraordinary detail and no visible copper on its edge, was purchased by a private collector for a staggering $110,000. What makes these coins so remarkable isn't just the error, it's the mystery. No official documentation from the mint has ever acknowledged how these planchets came to be used in 1988. Some speculate that leftover blanks from foreign contracts were accidentally fed into domestic production lines. Others believe they may have been part of unrecorded tests. But no matter the origin, these flawed dimes carry the weight of a hidden history, an unintentional story told through metal and machine. They were never meant to stand out. Yet they survived the press, escaped quality control, entered circulation, and lived quietly for years before sharp eyes and sharper minds finally uncovered them. From a 10-cent coin often overlooked and discarded, they transformed into treasures of modern numismatics. Today, the rare 1988 Roosevelt dime error is valued between $38,000 and $110,000, a silent masterpiece born from an invisible mistake. The year 2005 brought with it a sense of renewed momentum in the numismatic world. The U.S. Mint was deeply immersed in its popular state quarters program, which had ignited widespread public interest in coin collecting. But while the quarters were stealing the spotlight, dimes quietly continued their journey through the presses, fulfilling their humble role in daily commerce. Among them was the Roosevelt dime, a design that had remained virtually unchanged since its 1946 debut. It was a small coin, often forgotten at the bottom of purses and pockets, dismissed by many for its lack of variety. Yet, unknown to nearly everyone at the time, a quiet anomaly had made its way into circulation that year, a mistake so precise, so rare, it would eventually send ripples through the collecting community. The Roosevelt dime struck in 2005 was meant to be uneventful. Its obverse featured the familiar profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt, flanked by "Liberty" on the left and "In God We Trust" below. The date, 2005, sat neatly near the base, with a small mint mark revealing its origin, be it Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. On the reverse, the olive branch, torch, and oak symbolized peace, liberty, and strength. It was a coin perfected by repetition. Tens of millions were made that year, each one nearly identical. Or so it seemed. At a flea market in rural Missouri, a local collector named Dean Mullins sifted through a handful of pocket change coins in a bowl labeled 10 cents each. He wasn't expecting much, just hoping to find a few well-worn Mercury dimes or maybe a silver Roosevelt that had somehow survived the post-1964 purge. But as his fingers ran over a small stack, one dime caught his eye. It shimmered differently. The edge lacked the familiar copper stripe of modern clad coinage. He picked it up. It felt lighter, but not dramatically so, just enough to make him pause. He flipped it under a small flashlight keychain he always carried. At a glance, the dime looked normal. Roosevelt's features were all there, though the strike seemed unusually soft, especially near the date. The rim was weak. On the reverse, the design appeared off-center, barely, but enough to catch the eye. More curious was the surface. It had a matte quality to it, slightly grainy and dull rather than polished. He slipped it into a coin flip and took it home. The following week, Dean weighed the coin on a digital scale, 1.92 grams. That was significantly below the standard 2.27 grams for Roosevelt dimes. He tried again. Same result. Something wasn't right. He inspected the reeded edge under magnification, nearly smooth, missing entire portions of the expected ridges. He ran a magnet over it, nothing. So it wasn't steel or plated iron. The dimensions were within acceptable range, but the weight and appearance suggested something unusual. He submitted the coin for authentication. Weeks later, the grading company sent back a report that confirmed what Dean had started to suspect. The 2005 Roosevelt dime had been struck on a defective or foreign planchet, one not intended for U.S. dime production. The weight, metallic composition, and incomplete strike all pointed to a mint error involving either a transitional blank or a leftover foreign coin stock. The mystery deepened when metallurgical testing revealed it wasn't the typical copper-nickel clad, but a unique alloy combination that didn't match any domestic standards from that year. The mint had contracts with foreign governments to strike coins for other countries, and sometimes leftover blanks from these projects found their way into U.S. coinage runs. But how this one got past quality control remained a mystery. The error was subtle, but for seasoned collectors, it was explosive. It was the perfect storm of rarity, undocumented, unrecorded, unintentional. A dime that never should have existed. Other collectors began examining their 2005 dimes more closely. Some began to surface in small pockets. One found in Arizona bore similar characteristics, including a slightly off-center strike and unusually light weight. Another appeared in Florida, discovered in a child's piggy bank, with weak rim definition and dull surface tone. No two were exactly alike, but they all shared the same underlying error, struck on an incorrect or compromised planchet, making them rare beyond what casual collectors could imagine. By 2018, these dimes began appearing in auction catalogs with escalating prices. At first, cautious buyers paid modest premiums, $5,000, $7,000, testing the market's appetite. But as more authenticated examples became public, the value trajectory shifted dramatically. One particularly clean piece, graded MS66 and showing a near-perfect off-metal composition, sold for $32,000 at a major numismatic event. That price stunned casual collectors, but insiders knew it was only the beginning. As word spread and demand grew, prices climbed. By 2021, a high-grade error specimen with partial reading and flawless surface detail fetched $59,000 in a private sale. 2 years later, a virtually uncirculated 2005 Roosevelt dime, confirmed to be struck on a foreign aluminum planchet, stunned even experienced dealers when it sold for $90,000 to a West Coast collector with a growing collection of modern mint errors. Today, this dime, once dismissed as unremarkable, has become a whispered legend among those who know what to look for. Its value lies not in its design or scarcity of year, but in the invisible mistake that transformed it into something extraordinary. A simple coin, light in the hand, heavy in significance. The 2005 U.S. Roosevelt dime, once just another glint in a change jar, now stands among modern rarities with a value that ranges between $32,000 and $90,000, an unassuming fragment of metal that tells a story no machine ever meant to write.